Thank you for joining Juniper Networks today. I'm Neil Pound, and this webinar will look at disruption in the wide area network, specifically the effects of business MPLS revenue decline, enterprise branch transformation and how this is driving new WAN requirements, and finally strategies for SD-WAN that service providers should consider. I'm now going to hand over to Amit Dhir from PwC. Amit led a team undertaking research into the wide area network landscape, the same team that produced the paper SD-WAN for Service Providers, Opportunity or Threat. Over to you, Amit.
Thank you, Neil. I'm here to talk about the SD-WAN strategies for enterprises and service providers. My name is Amit Dhir. I'm a director with PwC in the advisory as a director in management consulting. As we look at this work around SD-WAN for service providers, the key question that we were asked is, and get asked a lot is SD-WAN a threat or an opportunity? And we can wait for the final episode, if you will, but I think our general take is it does represent an opportunity for the service providers. We engaged very closely with Neil and Juniper overall around this project where we did a number of interviews, a number of surveys with service providers, enterprises, a number of Juniper's peer companies, analysts, and also our broader research arm. We created a number of positioning documents, and then we have, and many of you may see us or have seen us on some roadshows we've done with Juniper together. Today's agenda, just very briefly, we'll talk about the business VPN revenue decline. We'll talk about the enterprise branch transformation, and then really what are some of the SD-WAN strategies for service providers. As you look at business VPN revenues, which are sort of giving away the punchline, certainly business VPN predicted to decline. If you look at it from a tale of just developed countries, right, which is North America and Western Europe, certainly we start to see out in time in the next 2-3 years where MPLS IPVPN starts to see a decline. Certainly the developing nations such in Asia, Africa, certainly show growth for MPLS IPVPN, but it's the developed countries which are much larger and on a much higher base which we start to see a decline. The parallel, if you will, from a SD-WAN perspective is certainly we are seeing the hockey stick growth in the SD-WAN market around it reaching $6 billion by 2020. So as you look at that, that's a pretty phenomenal growth rate when you look at it through the lens of the service providers and particularly the MPLS IPVPN decline. So we get asked this question, what are some of the reasons for the IPVPN revenue decline? And there's really, it's a threefold answer, right? So the first one is you're dealing with in a mature market where the competition's high, and certainly from an average selling price perspective, there's continued pressure. So that's number one. Number two is the migration to cloud. So we get asked this question quite a bit in terms of, as our clients look at migrating to the cloud, they've already started being less dependent in general to IPVPN. And we'll go into that here in a second. And then if you look at growth of SD-WAN, that is a key driver. So you have an alternate that's come about. We're not saying SD-WAN goes in and replaces MPLS IPVPN. What we see is the coexistence certainly leads to an alternate which the market was looking for, and these three together are contributors to the decline in MPLS revenue out in time. Let's shift gears a little and talk about the enterprise branch transformation. If you will, when the enterprises engage with us, what we often hear are their 4 key requirements continue to be improved business agility, driving efficiency with automation, ease of migration to cloud applications, and then reduce overall costs. So many times when people approach the SD-WAN question, it's always started with a cost equation, but the surveys and the research that we've done suggest these three other elements of business agility, efficiency with automation, and migration to cloud applications are pretty key also in driving the driving needs of the enterprise. When we look at the architecture from an SD-WAN perspective, certainly, you have a campus, you have branch offices, and you look at the MPLS IPVPN giving access to an enterprise data center. So many times this on-prem, having your own data center, certainly the links are, MPLS links that many enterprises have used over time. That gives excellent performance. The quality of service and service level agreements are very high. Long deployment times. If you need an additional link because you have multiple applications, that was pretty easy and continues to be. But the SD-WAN architecture starts to change things, which is what you see is certainly, whether it's your CRM or certain non-critical applications, if you will, you have folks over lunch looking at sports scores and other non-critical activities. You certainly start to see companies embracing cloud in general. And then the question gets asked, well, why are we paying for very expensive links for a number of these, and already have started the migration? So certainly the security remains centralized if you go about that way. However, it is not an efficient cloud internet traffic mobilization mechanism. So certainly what we've seen now is, particularly with our mobile devices, we've all moved to also accessing the internet and a number of these mobile cloud applications through our phone. We do it through home, as we are traveling a lot. So what's happened is definitely the network architecture itself has continued to evolve. So these broadband services, certainly low cost per megabit per second is a big thing, and it's also quick to deploy. However, there isn't much quality of service or service level agreements, but many of us have come to embrace this as we've accepted broadband and LTE. As you look at, what are some of the key components of SD-WAN, right? Let's talk through that. So certainly CPEs fall under SD-WAN, which is, these devices enforce the routing policies and enable easy deployment and management. So particularly you have a campus or a branch office, right? Having these devices allow management much easier. There's certainly a controller, right, which allows the policy-based routing, which defines essentially how your traffic through the network is prioritized and routed. There's certainly analytics, right, so which allow, if you will, a service provider to provide visibility into the WAN performance and informs routing improvements. So should you potentially run certain applications at certain times, or do you replicate your data center out in the cloud at a different time over a weekend when certain other applications are running, just to balance out the network? So analytics certainly help with that. And certainly the quality of service and SLA using MPLS, right, performance for traffic offload and MPLS, there's a number of optional capabilities, which is WAN optimization, reduced cost per megabit per second, better visibility, also faster deployment, right, for broadband and automation, and the central policy enforcement, right? SD-WAN gives you all of these. Now, certainly, and this gets talked about a lot, which is around distributed security, is something that companies are working to address, and then certainly management of SD-WAN just from a service perspective becomes a negative factor. But generally, as you see, there's a number of positives as you look at SD-WAN coming into the marketplace and being a viable option for the enterprises, and thus something the service providers do need to address. Of course, now the quick question around TCO, right? Total cost of ownership, which SD-WAN brings. The one question asked always is SD-WAN compared to traditional WANs. And as we look at TCO savings, there are many factors that go in it, right? So certainly your location is a key part. So if you're US and are paying your charges for broadband here compared to a traditional WAN, certainly different from any other location. But these are just approximate savings we wanted to show. for an enterprise that has, let's say, 250 branches, so you take a retailer or something like that, or a bunch of coffee shops out in the marketplace, if you take a 3-year TCO, SD-WAN certainly brings, from our perspective, a 50 to 60% savings, with a bulk of that being the WAN link, a bulk of that also being the proprietary network hardware. Certainly maintenance and administrative overhead remains, but that's what gives the 50 to 60% savings we were talking about. Again, I do want to emphasize that this will vary depending on your location and your exact configuration that you have, but we did want to share with you some of our research around total cost of ownership. Certainly from a use case perspective, right, coming back to why and what are enterprises getting interested in SD-WAN as a solution, and it comes back to literally a couple of the same factors that we opened this section with. Is what are the enterprises looking for? So they do want support of high bandwidth applications, right? So as you bring multiple users to your CRM solution, or you're looking to simplify traffic management rather than make it more complicated, accelerate a branch to be deployed, right? So if you want to open a bunch of coffee shops, as we were talking about, how do you make them self-sustaining without making it too burdensome? And then there is facilitating mergers and acquisitions as companies look to unite or split up. Certainly from an IT budget, SD-WAN does bring a use case which makes it simplified as well as less expensive in the longer run. So as we look at options from a enterprise perspective, right, there's many models. There's a self-built, right, do-it-yourself SD-WAN. And then in the managed SD-WAN, there's a couple of different ways, which is over-the-top layers and then bundled with MPLS, right? If you look at pros and cons of a do-it-yourself, there's full control of the solution components, right? That's what gets provided to the service provider. However, there are operational costs, there's technological risks, several factors go in there. But with the managed SD-WAN, the two areas, an over-the-top certainly allows you rapid deployment, global coverage, right? However, there are performance concerns as well as managing multiple systems. When it comes to bundling with MPLS, this is the full integrated solution, lower risk. What we find is a number of service providers are getting in this because this truly allows that unified complete support, global coverage, and also telco stickiness continuation. So these are the options for enterprises as enterprises look at, right, what solutions get provided, and certainly something Juniper will talk a lot more about in terms of their offerings in this space later on. In terms of, the research that we did, which was the enterprise study, so we surveyed 50 enterprises, and we're looking at what are the key reasons to drive adoption, right? And the adoption, one part we wanted to capture was the ones who are planning to adopt and the ones who have adopted SD-WAN, right? Why and what were those key drivers? One would imagine the first one is certainly cost of traditional WAN solutions, right? The second one, migrating business critical applications, which we talked about, right? Like your CRM and configure price quote, increasing flexibility, increased ease of use, and increasing automation. Now, the surprising one is the cost of traditional WAN solutions for the ones who've adopted certainly becomes a number 3. What their take over time is the flexibility and the automation are actually really valuable as you adopt SD-WAN and start using it. So it's just a perspective that we wanted to share. This was a global survey that we did, pretty cross verticals and cross demographics. But certainly one requisite we had as we put this survey together was these enterprises should be considering SD-WAN or have adopted SD-WAN. So that was a pretty critical part in our survey. All right, so shifting gears to the service provider lens, right? Which is we wanted to give a perspective on how are service providers looking at SD-WAN, particularly given, we talked about a number of things. These are the elements enterprises are looking for, right? And then also from a market perspective, what's happening and what did the surveyed customers say? So let's see what the service providers are thinking now, right? If you look at a classic case of technology providers who sell their equipment and their software to service providers. The service providers then provide solutions to the enterprises, different enterprise. We just took a smattering of different players in this whole ecosystem. There's certainly many more. The value is certainly starting to shift, right? So you take a look at, there's a number of providers who are jumping directly to provide solutions to enterprises, right? And there's a number of them in these enterprises. However, there are other providers. There's a number of SD-WAN point solutions that have come about. I think at last count, roughly 20 to 25 point solution providers. There's a number of technology partners in this mix. There's also the CSPs, right? They are also players in this who enable you as an enterprise to go to just a CSP and get your solution offering through that. And there's certainly multiple system operators. So the cable vendors in this case, they certainly support multiple systems. So as you look at these new players who've entered, the value chain has started to shift, right? Which certainly with these number of players, everyone talking about SD-WAN has certainly brought marketing messages to the marketplace, but it's also brought in a number of different solutions, right? And the whole case of SD-WAN and provisioning to enterprise customers is a case of good enough, secure, reliable transport networks. And we just wanted to paint the landscape of the number of players in this space. As you look at the different SD-WAN go-to-market models, we talked about this, right, before in terms of the three different models. Certainly the early adopters have taken the DIY approach, right? So they want to understand it. They want to start adopting it as quickly as they can. But what we found is the second wave of adopters will be the managed service providers. And that's already started. And the preferred option will be the, if you will, MPLS service providers. And then large enterprises will continue to manage their own SD-WAN infrastructure, but the offering will also come from a number of telcos as we move to the mass adoption. I think coming full circle from an implication to the service providers and our white paper that we published, we did look at a number of threats. So certainly value loss, where you start working with other companies and, cannibalization of your current MPLS revenue certainly seems like a threat. But our take would be there are operational efficiencies that service providers will go through. Improved customer value, right? So you're giving what the customer wants. They want flexibility. They want automation. You're bringing it to them. And our belief is this opens up new revenue streams for the service provider as they look to provision SD-WAN as an option to their customer base. When you look at the value tree for service providers, right? So certainly there's financial levers, which then you want to understand, okay, what are the business goals and then the key enablers? Probably just taking a couple here, let me start with reducing costs, right? So as you look at reducing costs, it's a goal of managing total cost of ownership and reduction of risk, right? So there are a number of things that the enablers in this case are offering an integrated platform to quickly deploy multiple solutions, or enabling your customers to flexibly scale WAN connectivity and services. There's a case of reduced risk with the carrier-grade connectivity via public internet, and then automating service delivery and lowering service costs. So a number of these elements lead to what we think from a value perspective, reduce costs for service providers. When it comes to increasing revenue, our take is there is an enhanced MPLS infrastructure. So you can upsell more bandwidth, you can integrate more cloud connectivity services and bundle higher value add services. So you increase stickiness, but then you can also enable new revenue streams. So now you're acquiring new customer segments. So if you couldn't offer solutions to SMBs as an example, because an MPLS link was out of their price range, SD-WAN gives an option now. You can also provide cloud-based NFV-enabled services. And certainly you will see that service providers will see that they have enterprise customers that are looking to expand out of region, out of coverage area, which certainly allows you to make partnerships or service those companies through the existing MPLS network. So certainly we think there are potential new revenue streams and operational efficiencies which will enable service providers to maintain and improve profitability. Even in the face of declining MPLS revenues, we do think this is more of an opportunity than a threat. As we look at, SD-WAN strategies for service providers, I wanted to spend a little bit of time around how do we see the adoption coming from service providers. So perhaps we start from the top left, which is the do not adopt situation, right? So we do see some service providers saying, hey, we stay where we are, we drive efficiency through MPLS automation, we digitalize the IPVPN service experience, and just the expectation is over time, average revenue per user will decline, right? So that's one mode. The second one is, which is reselling third-party SD-WAN. So this is, okay, a lot of your customers start to now ask, what do I do for SD-WAN? And you're looking at a quick short-term win, quick implementation. It essentially shows the service provider providing value to the vendor fairly quickly. The third and the fourth ones are really which are very interesting, which is SD-WAN service to grow in enterprise segments. So this is new players into the market. They don't have any IPVPN service, and they're now coming into the marketplace to just provide SD-WAN. Now, this could be SD-WAN as a strategy to grow the enterprise business, and a number of equipment providers could jump into this and have. Our take is we are seeing a number of service providers look at what is the left bottom, which is integrating SD-WAN with IPVPN MPLS. So we think your customers who have MPLS will certainly be coming to you looking for SD-WAN options. This integrated IPVPN and SD-WAN platform is a critical one. It shows the service provider providing value through a combined offering. It de-risks the solution for the enterprise, right? They're dealing with one service provider as opposed to multiple, single bill, and certainly incremental number of services, right? So can you now sell analytics potentially even beyond selling, MPLS, SD-WAN, and a number of other things? So certainly from our perspective, these are the four modes, and there are service providers in each category we can probably name, but certainly we are seeing the bottom left integration of SD-WAN with IPVPN and MPLS as the key option that multiple service providers are looking at. So coming back to the survey, we just wanted to also talk through what are the features and concerns the enterprises have as they look at SD-WAN, right? So the key features they're looking for is centralized configuration. This is 88% of the survey respondents, again, back to 50 respondents, global enterprises who are considering SD-WAN or have adopted SD-WAN, 88% of them are looking at centralized configuration. 74% are looking at automated provisioning, and then 64% are looking at end-to-end support. So these are the top three features that enterprises are looking at. And then some of the key concerns to take into account as you approach these enterprises and need to ensure you solve for, the first one being reliability, right? So downtime, ability to be working with two different solutions becomes pretty critical to have a reliable solution that delivers performance, and certainly security can't be compromised. So top three concerns also from the survey that we did find. Now, as you look at service providers having these different options to offer an integrated SD-WAN platform to the customer, we wanted to provide just what are, from a time to market perspective and business benefit and impact, what are those certain areas? So if you look at time to market being high and business benefit being high, increasing out of range coverage, acquiring new segments, and certainly leveraging SD-WAN to integrate with cloud connectivity services, we find as the high in terms of what we feel service providers can provide from a quicker standpoint. Now, the key area to look at is service providers can get a competitive edge in the SD-WAN market by focusing on options that provide maximum business benefits. So this is the circled area, right, which is on the left, which are the four key options are certainly around providing cloud services, cloud-based NFV-enabled services, bundling high-value add services to increase stickiness, automating service delivery, and then lowering service costs by managing resources intelligently. Those are the four key options, in offering an integrated SD-WAN platform to the customers are the options that service providers have. As we look at, so we talked about this broad MPLS market. I talked about the developed markets being around 17.5 billion, which is, North America and Western Europe. As you look out in time by 2020, you look at a 17.5 billion going down, but not precipitously, going down nonetheless to 16.2. Our take is there are a number of additional services that SD-WAN brings that delivers higher value. So if we take a look at analytics, so I talked about that, enhanced security, right? As you move to these links, you're certainly now talking about, enhanced security. Out of region coverage, this could be big. We've taken a nominal view here. And then what are those interconnects with cloud providers, acquiring new segments, and hybrid WAN enabled by SD-WAN. So customers you didn't have that you can offset from other service providers. So if you look at the marketplace, our view is there is a significant add here of 2.8 billion, which does offset that lowering of by 1.3 billion by 2020, which is key as you consider this new set of options with SD-WAN enabled revenue streams. Certainly, advantage of getting SD-WAN from a CSP, right? So you look at communication service providers, there is cost savings, analytics, and performance, which SD-WAN gives. And then certainly integrating with MPLS, end-to-end centralized management, and the risk mitigation support and new service is what we want to equate to SD-WAN advantage if you get it from a communication service provider as opposed to directly from an equipment provider. So with that, I wanted to thank you for your time, and I would now like to hand this back to Neil. Neil, thank you.
Thank you, Amit, and thank you for the insight into what is a fascinating dynamic in our industry. So, despite what some people may say, service providers can embrace SD-WAN, and by developing an integrated approach can gain a competitive edge in the wide area network market. By focusing on delivering maximum business benefits through cloud-based NFV-enabled services, automating service delivery, bundling high-value add services to increase stickiness, and by lowering operational costs by managing resources intelligently, service providers can seize the opportunity and evade the threat. Setting on a strategy, however, is relatively easy, but how do you turn this into a reality? What are the building blocks? What is the logical order? And what other factors should you consider? At Juniper, we've given this a lot of thought, and we will share this with you in Starters Orders, your SD-WAN roadmap. Thank you once again for joining us.